Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Build Room. In this week's episode, we are solving the mystery of the RA23 to RA40 idler arm conversion. So stick around and check it out. Okay, so welcome back. It's actually been far too long. We had some technical difficulties over the Christmas break, but it is good to be back and doing another episode on Violet Crumbles. Okay, so before we get too far into this week's episode, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Mark McClintock. Now, Mark, you messaged me about the grease caps for the TA22 hubs. You did say that you'd shot me some contact details, but as yet I haven't seen them. If you are watching, just hit me up again on the build room at Outlook and shoot me a message or something so that I can get these over to you. So moving on, for those of you who have watched the episode where I pull all of the suspension and running gear out of Violet Crumbles, and I'll link to it here, in that episode I talk about the idler arm, which is a component of the front steering. So you have a pitman arm that connects to the bottom of the steering box. You have a track rod that runs basically horizontally across the car, and then an idler arm at the other end. Now the idler arm doesn't exert any movement force, that's all done by the pitman arm on the steering box, but the idler arm is there to keep that rod horizontal so that you get an equal transfer of movement between the left and the right wheels. Now those idler arms are no longer made by pretty much Toyota or any other aftermarket company, so they're getting really, really hard to find. Now, a lot of people have recommended putting an RA40 arm onto an RA23 body. So I've got the two here, I'll show you them now. So the RA23 arm and the RA40 arm are quite similar. Realistically, the biggest visual difference that I can see so far is a difference in the mounting points. So you can see there's about a centimetre to a centimetre and a half difference centre to centre of the two mounting point holes. Meaning this isn't a direct bolt-in swap. You do have to create a hybrid idler arm. Now I believe there's a lot of people that have actually done that conversion and say it's successful. I have also seen a couple of posts, and I've also had a friend that has suggested that there is a difference between the two. In fact, my friend's car basically broke an RA40 idler arm right off near the tie rod end, and it was only picked up when he went to take the car over the pits. Now that's potentially a pretty unsafe situation, so before I go ahead and make that conversion on my car, I just wanted to give both of these a full going over and compare the two so that I can figure out whether it's going to be a reasonable spot for me to do, or whether I should send this one off and just have it rebuilt. Now that's going to take some time, which is probably something I don't have at the moment, and maybe a little bit more expensive. So we'll call it plan B, and for now, we'll try and make this one work. So let's take a look at them on the bench and see how close we are just to start. Okay, so first things first, this is the RA40 idler arm. It's a WASP WSX1141. And if we look up close, we can see that the arm is actually stamped with 555, which is a fairly well-known manufacturer of aftermarket suspension componentry. Now, as I said before, if we look at the RA28, we definitely have a difference in the distance between the two mounting points. And what we're going to try and do here is undo this bolt here, pull this arm off, do the same on here, and put this arm onto this bracket. Now, in addition to the difference in the mounting point, some of the resources that I've read online also say there can be a difference in the diameter of the shaft that the idler arm bushes sit around. So once we take this off, we might find that the bushes in here need to actually be replaced if we're going to make this work, provided it is the right shape and everything measures up. So the first thing I need to do is take the bottom nut off both of these and get the arms side by side so I can compare them properly. Okay, so this is actually really interesting. The limited amount of movement in here is really quite surprising. This is in a vise. I'm putting quite a bit of pressure on it, and it's not moving. This all seems to be bound up. Yeah, okay, we're gonna have to have a look at this. What I'm gonna try and do is just work on this one first, because it's a bit more sacrificial, and and we'll see how much it compares to this one. Okay, powder nut. Oh, quite a interesting little seal there. All right. So that was something that I reasonably would have expected to be that loose. And this one's not actually too bad. This tyrrhide end at this end is actually pretty reasonable, but I'm going to all the trouble of doing all of the rest of the bushes and arms and knuckles and tyrrhide ends and all that sort of thing as we go through this. So leaving this as is probably not something I'm going to do. You can see that that center bush is starting to break up at least. So this is the bit that we actually want to retain. That aside, and we'll see if we can get this one apart. It does seem very strange. If that is that tight, and that's a common thing, I can see why they might break. So that's moving more freely now without this on it. Just wondering why that was so tight. It's just, maybe it's been on a shelf too long. Okay, so we can see that it was greased or had some sort of lubricant on it before, but yeah, that was just way too tight. Okay, so now it's time to compare the two arms just to make sure they are in fact a match for each other. Okay, so we're going to start by drawing a representation of the arm, and we're looking to understand the center point here to here for both the RA23 or 8 and the RA40. So I'm going to measure the outside diameter of the arm first around the mount bushing. We have, let's say 40.3. Which means the radius is 20.15. On the RA40, yeah, 40.3, this is 40.32. This is a bit rougher, so there might just be that amount of difference. So I'm going to call them close enough, which means the radius on each will be 20.15. And then the distance to the center point of the ball joint, and this is rough because I am literally eyeballing it, to there, we're going to say about 118.25. And then on the RA40, $118.25. So both of those numbers are this is 118.26, but 1/100th of a millimeter is not really material in this. So it looks good there from above. Both look the same. Now the only other thing that I can think of is the angle. So on some white paper, first up we'll flip them that way. That looks pretty even to me, but on top of each other with some contrast. Look, I gotta say, I don't see any difference there, or at least not enough difference to change the forces exerted on the ball joint and end up breaking the ball joint. What I do think is the level of stiffness that we had here before could have been a reason for that breaking. If this wasn't moving and it did feel like it was just completely bound up, if you would put a reasonable amount of steering torque onto the pitman arm, the relay rod could have pushed this enough to snap this shaft. So for now, I'm going to say I would be comfortable having that on my car. You have to obviously make your own decisions on this stuff, but I'm going to have a look at the diameter of the mounting points now, and we'll compare those two, and then we'll look to fit these together. Okay, so we have a mounting bracket with an 18mm outside diameter shaft, and we have a 16mm internal diameter here. We are going to have to remove this bush. We can destroy that rubber. I don't care if I have to cut the ends off it or whatever and then just push it out. It should be relatively easy. And then we'll see what sort of internal diameter we've got on the on the actual arm itself. And then we are going bush hunting to try and find something that's going to be appropriate to, I guess, fill that hole. Okay, so in order to get the bush out, normally I would just press it out. Now, I have a press, it's not a very good one, it's a bit of a pain in the butt to use, and it is also buried at the back of my shed at the moment, so that's gonna take hours to get out, which I don't have. So I'm gonna try doing something a little bit differently first. And the way that some people get these out without a press is just to burn the rubber out, and then the internal shell will obviously just drop away quite easily at that point. But burning it out makes a lot of smoke, as you would imagine with burning rubber. It's probably not great for the environment either. So what I'm gonna do is actually just cut away the top so that it can slide out one way, but then drill it out so that there's less tension in there. So I'll basically just be drilling a bunch of different holes. The only thing I really need to be careful is that I don't drill into the side of the housing. So I just need to make sure I drill straight through. So we'll try that first, and then if not, I'll work on a plan B. Okay, so now that I've got the majority of the rubber out of here, there is, it doesn't look like it, but there is actually significantly more movement in this center piece. So what I'm gonna do is use the bench vise as a quasi press. Now, if that doesn't work, at that point, I think I'm gonna need some heat here in order to melt the remaining rubber. There's not that much left in there, but it's still probably gonna smoke up a lot and be quite messy, but anyway. Let's see if we can get it out as is, and if not, we will resort to fire. Okay, that looks like it might have been somewhat successful. Yep. Okay, so we're starting to get that piece out. I can't push it all the way out the way I had it. Obviously we're gonna bottom out here. So I'll try something a bit different. We're off. No need for fire, which is good. And now we have quite a messy, but only rubber area left. So we've just got to get this piece out. All right. Okay, so that bushing is clear. Looking at it, the inside surface is pretty good. So I will tidy that up. And then what I need to do is measure the inner diameter here and get a new bush for this one. Okay, so I've just measured up the arm, and I think we're gonna have a problem here. So the internal diameter of this idler arm is 28 millimeters. Now, the bush that I've seen listed as the one you use for this conversion has a 24 millimeter outside diameter, meaning it is going to be far too loose in this arm. It's just going to fall out. So I don't think that's going to work, unless when I go and pick one up, it's a different size than what's listed on the website, which sometimes happens. But at the moment, things aren't looking to crash hot for that. Now, this is also a WSX 1141 arm. Now, the listed part for this conversion is a SX1141, but this item is from Wasp, and Wasp, I believe, put different manufacturers' parts occasionally into their boxes for certain cars. This is a 555, or actually it's a 35 arm, which is made in Japan. Now, 35 has a very good reputation if you're buying the Japanese ones. They do also have parts that are made in China, which the rep is not so good on. But for all intents and purposes, this should be a good arm, and it is listed to fit the RA40. So it's not as simple as just getting an RA40 arm and this Super Pro bush and throwing the two together, right? It just illustrates that there can be problems with parts. I'm gonna go out now and I'll get the standard bush, and I'm gonna try a couple of other bushes, and then we'll bring them back and see what we've got. Before I do that, however, I'm just gonna give that idler arm a clean up and a coat of paint so that it's dry by the time I get back from bush hunting. Okay, so we've got the majority of the rust off here. There's obviously some staining, but I don't need to polish that off, that's fine. But if you look around the top of the shaft here, this edge is actually a toothed ring here. Once this goes on and over, it'll lock in place so that you have your 60mm here for the bush to move around freely in without this wanting to twist along with it and either undo this nut or prematurely wear any of the componentry or something like that. So it is going to be important here for whatever I get bush-wise, it does need to still fit in that 60mm. So now it's all cleaned up, it's looking pretty good, and we can get it ready for some paint. All right, so we'll leave that arm to dry, hit the streets and see if we can find that Goldilocks bush.
Several bad puns later.
Okay, so we're back in the garage and we have got a lot of bush. Let's get them on the workbench and see what we have. Okay, we have the Super Pro SPF 1287K. Now that is the one that is recommended for doing this RA28, RA40 conversion or hybrid, whatever you want to call it. We have a Whiteline W11068, which is a Hilux two-wheel drive bush, and we have a W7 1694, which is my extreme option. I'm not sure what car it's off, but I'll show you why I have all three of these. So firstly, the Super Pro. So these are basically a cotton reel bush. They go together like that inside the idler arm. This one has a 24mm outside diameter and an 18mm internal diameter. Fantastic for the mounting bracket shaft, because this is 18mm. Unfortunately, we have a 28mm internal diameter here, meaning we are shit out of luck with this one. That is never going to fit in there properly. So this one is really off the table for doing this conversion if you're using this particular arm. Now, I have done a little bit more research on the arm itself, and I believe that you can get different versions of this arm that have different internal diameters. So there is an SX1141 part number listed more generically by a bunch of different vendors, including ProTech and some other common brands, and that may have a 24mm internal diameter. I can't confirm that, but judging by some of the forum posts, it's a fairly solid bet that there is a similar arm with a smaller internal diameter. Now that's not going to help me right now because I've already destroyed this arm. It can't be sent back or exchanged, so I might as well try and make the most out of it. Which brings us to this bush, which is for the two-wheel drive Hilux. Now this bush is a three-parter. It has the two sides of the cotton reel bush and then a metal crush tube which goes inside. Now the outside diameter of this bush is 29mm and the internal is 19.2, I believe. Now that means that we have an extra mil on the outside and we're shy of 1.2 mil or thereabouts, because these normally have some tolerance in them on the inside if we don't use this tube. So I'm going to put that to the side and then give this a quick measure. So we have about just over 29.13 on the dial here outside, and then internally we're looking at 19.03, so a little bit tighter, obviously, to fit around the shaft there. So we are going to compress this bush by 1mm on the outside. Hopefully that tightens up the inside here. I don't know if it'll get down to 18mm, but we will find out. If I show you this on the arm at the moment, we would have a fair amount of play there. There's literally about 1mm, or obviously half a millimeter either side, but 1mm in total play here. Now, the final bush. Now these ones are a 18mm internal diameter and it's knurled so it doesn't have this crush tube. And then if we measure the outside, we're getting to 29.8 there on the outside diameter, so we're 1.8 mils too big for this one. But on the shaft, we have a much tighter fit there. Now, in addition to being too big on the outside here, it's also too long. So this one is 47-ish mil total length, and we have 60 mil to play with on our shaft here. So we're looking for this to only be 30 mil in total, which means that we would have to cut 17 millimeters down through this, and then we'd have almost a perfectly sized bush. Now you can cut these down, you just need a really sharp tool on a lathe, and you can really only cut the outsides and the ends. Trying to cut the inside diameter usually distorts it, and you're in a world of trouble. So the Super Pro are out immediately. I'm gonna work with these Hilux bushes and see whether the compression of the outside translates to enough of a reduction on the internal diameter, and see. Now, just a note, when we're working on these, Super Pro and White Line have different strategies around lubing their bush. Super Pro have free floating bushes that they just say basically you put lubricant on every surface. White Line are a little bit different. They tell you not to grease the outside of these casings, and basically to only grease areas that will have friction on them, which would be if you push this bush into here, the bush should hopefully not move in the arm. It should be the mounting point that rotates within the bush. Okay, that's what we're looking for. So whenever you're going to install bushes, just go to the manufacturer website and check out what their advice is for their particular bush. So we'll get rid of these ones and we'll see what we can do with the White Line. So put it on a flat surface, just put the idler arm on top vertically, and just give it a reasonable amount of pressure. All right, that's seated nice and flat around the bottom. Feels quite good in there, feels very tight. Nicely at home, nicely seated. So I'll just measure what this new distance here is. If we measure all the way inside, let's see what we get. All right, so it's 17.8385, so just under 18 mil. That's promising. I'll put the other side in now, flat on the surface, just pushing the idler arm over the top. Okay, and then so once again, we're just checking the internal diameter. Yep, we're about 17.75 there again. All right, so the bushes are in the arm. The numbers are looking good there, but the proof will be in the pudding. We have the idler arm mount ready to roll. The paint's looking fantastic on that. And then we have some high performance bushing lubricant. Now these actually just come with the bushes. So generally speaking, if you buy any brand of bushes nowadays, they usually include their particular bushing lube. Don't make the mistake of using normal grease because it can eat out these urethane bushes. We just need to lube all of the parts that are going to see friction, which will be this shaft here, the internal of the bush, the ends of the bush, because they're going to hit this piece of metal and that locking washer that sits at this end, and the ends of the rubber bush themselves, just so that we've got lube on both sides. So let's do that. You can be pretty generous with the lubricant. It's going to push out a little bit when we put the steering mount in here anyway, so whatever's excess is just going to pop out the other end. All right, so that's looking pretty good. You don't want any dry spots, so just make sure you got cover. Now before you reassemble it, remember which way the arm goes, and that is wrong, so that's actually the right way to go. The knuckle here, the ball joint, whatever you want to call it, should be pointing down. All right, and now the moment of truth, we're going to put these together and hope that it's fairly tight. Oh, wow. All right, that's actually, yeah, that was very tight. I mean, it's still got plenty of movement now that it's in, but it wasn't exactly an easy press in. There's no lateral movement in that really at all that I can feel. So that actually feels pretty good. So we'll get the washer on now. Pop the nut back on. This is a nylock nut, so it doesn't need any thread lock or anything like that. All right, so that's very tight in there, and yeah, we've still got reasonable movement. So just clean up some of that excess lube and we'll see what we have. All right, finished idler arm. I actually think that that's going to be workable. That bush tightened up a lot in there. I'm really quite happy with the amount of movement that we have and the feel of it when I was putting that shaft through. So that all was pretty good. Just get enough horizontal crush in here to make sure that this washer had moved up enough to engage those teeth that I showed you earlier when we got the nut back on. And to be honest, that's not easy to move, but it is smooth. It's actually buttery smooth. So yeah, I'm fairly confident that that is going to do the job. All right, so I'm going to take that. I think we have just snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. So I'm not just going to take this at face value because we still have a bush in here that was 1 millimeter too big for the housing itself and 1 millimeter too small for the mounting shaft. So when I put this back on the car, what I'm going to do is drive it for 100, 200 kilometers, and then I'll be pulling the nut off the bottom just to make sure that the bush is still in reasonable condition. I don't want to end up in a situation where we just have the shaft reaming out this bush flat out. So with that done, what have we learned today? I think the obvious thing is that in the car world, working on these particularly old cars that parts are hard to find for, nothing is ever easy. Now I've triple checked, including the WASP product catalog. The idler arm that I have is listed for an RA40, 100%. So it's not just going to be as simple as grabbing any old RA40 idler arm, putting the known Super Pro bush with it, and job done. But we did manage to find a bush for this one which does seem to work. So at least we're ahead of the game there. And the question is, at the end of the day, would I recommend that you guys at home put this combination in your car? And the answer to that one is no. So let's compare what options you actually do have to get this happening. You can do what we've done today, which is to use the WASP WSX1141 idler arm, and you can use the Whiteline W11068 bush in it, and you will get exactly what I have here. Now, I feel comfortable based on what I've done putting this on my car, but because of the unknown quantity of that bush, it's not something I'd recommend you guys do. So the second option here is to get a different idler arm, an SW1141 that has the 24mm inside diameter on the arm. Then the Super Pro bush that I showed you should work fine, and you can rebuild something that's very close to OEM, and the tolerances on the bush match up with the sizings of both the arm and the mount. I have a couple of other RA28s. They're going to need idler arms as well. So what I'm going to do is do that conversion on one of those just to make sure 100% that it's Mickey Mouse. And once I have got around to doing that, and it's not going to be immediately, but I'll probably put a link in this video up here just so that you can compare the two options when the time comes for you. Thirdly, if you want a no mess, no fuss option, you can just send your idler arm away to be rebuilt. So if we have a look at the back side of this knuckle, you can see that there is sort of a steel plate here that's stamped with 3.5 and 555, whatever you want to call it, made in Japan, which is obviously the one that we want to see to check the quality. What a rebuilder will do is basically cut the back off this. They will put a new ball joint housing and arm into it from the back, and then they will re-laminate over this, and you will have yourself a rebuilt joint, and then they can also rebuild the bush using just the standard Toyota, well not Toyota, but even the Super Pro bush, because that is actually listed for an RA28, but they can use a proper bush in here and get you back to almost OEM. So my recommendation is pick whichever one of those you personally feel comfortable with. It's your car, it's your safety, you've got to make the call. And with that final thought, I'm going to call this episode done, which leaves us with the question, what are we in for on the next episode? So next week, we have some lowered I-bark springs and some spacers ready to go on the A90 Supra. Now, before everyone gets too excited, the spacers are there for shows only, not for normal driving or track use. But I am looking to get the car about 20mm lower and have the OEM wheels flush with the guards. So tune in next week to check that one out. And if you're new to the channel, you can see the full Violet Crumble series here and the A90 series here. If you liked the episode, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you get updates when the new episodes come out. Other than that, thanks for watching The Build Room and bye for now.